Cardinal Cajetan was frustrated by the new direction of the committee responsible for writing the critical portions of the papal bull outlining the errors of the German monk Martin Luther.
The problem was the newest addition to the committee, John Eck, the theologian from Ingolstadt, Germany. Before John Eck had arrived, the committee was making real progress on a serious and scholarly analysis of Luther's teaching. Now, due to Eck's pushing for a quick release, the document was closer to an amalgamation of anything that might be considered offensive. The document was losing much of its scholarly detail and focus.
Cardinal Cajetan was right to be concerned. The mischaracterizations which would come to define the document that would ultimately become Exsurge Domine would become representative of the destructive talking points both Catholics and Protestants used against one another for centuries to come. I'm Mike Yeagley.
And I'm Evan Gertner, and this is Grace on Tap. Grace on Tap is a podcast dedicated to a review of the history and content of documents from the Lutheran Reformation all over a nice, cold beer.
So today's episode is going to focus on Exsurge Domine. And, we'll just have one drink for the Exsurge Domine.
Because every time we use some Latin, we take a drink to make sure we stay humble, and yet we can't do that in this episode every time we say the word.
So we'll just do it once. This covers all the times we say Exsurge Domine. So
Not a lot of Lutheran scholarship on Exsurge Domine. It's mostly considered the papal eviction notice that Luther burned.
So this was the document that the Catholic Church put out to Luther to put him on warning, saying either you change or you're out. And Luther burned it. And from a Lutheran perspective, we really don't care about it much beyond that. It was burned, it was done.
Well, one of the reasons we don't care about it as much is because it has no specifics to it. It's so much easier to debate and have some conversation if there's clear, all right, this is what was opposed, let's address it by scripture. And instead, we're going to talk about how John Eck, when he comes to the committee and he bulldozes his way through it and makes sure something gets published quickly, well, it becomes something that is largely just an attack piece without much substance.
Now, we pulled most of the information we're going to be sharing today, or at least a lot of it, from Catholic scholars. And as I was looking through Catholic scholarship on Exsurge Domine, I was really surprised and pleasantly surprised by the balanced approach they took. They were really honest about, what was good with it and what was bad, mostly what was bad.
And for the website, we will list some links to where you can read Exsurge Domine, including a link to papalencyclicals.net, where you can see the document in its fullness.
It's also, of course, at the Vatican. So that was...
Then this is a Vatican website.
Oh, that's a Vatican website. Okay, yeah. Very good. So, Exsurge Domine, really, let's give a little bit of background. Exsurge Domine didn't come from nowhere. It didn't come out of thin air. It started when Luther started to question the scholastic theology.
Scholastic theology, that idea that a relationship to God can be understood through reason, is kind of a brief. I'm sure someone could say, "Oh, it's a lot more than that," but just quickly.
So then Luther goes after scholastic theology because he decided to defend his personal parish from the excesses of indulgences. So he nailed the 95 theses, which were just one-sentence arguments. This is sort of going back and sort of bringing everybody up to speed on what Exsurge Domine is about on the Church door in Wittenberg for a scholarly discussion.
There's the printing press. So the 95 Theses spread throughout Europe. It's largely a supply and demand. People are interested, so they print more, and they get spread more and more. Luther called to a discussion with the cardinal. Cajetan was a right man for the job. He was learned. He was thoughtful. He was had experience as an inquisitor. He had been the head of the Dominican order. He had the weight of scholarship to be able to talk to Luther, which was different than John Tetzel or some of those others that had come to Luther that really couldn't handle him.
Now, the more I learn about Cardinal Cajetan, the more I like him, actually. He is a thoughtful man who really wants to get to the facts and figure out what is going on.
He wants to have a conversation, but when they meet in Augsburg, his hands are tied by the Pope. He was told, get Luther to reject what had been written. Well, there was no room for any thoughtful discussion, and so the discussions broke down. Luther did not recant, and he stayed in Germany.
So the next thing that happened that was consequential, at least for this, is that Luther had a discussion with John Eck. He's the theologian from Erfurt.
From Ingolstadt.
Oh, I'm sorry, Ingolstadt.
But they meet in Leipzig for a debate. Eck was brilliant. He was known as a bombastic debater who would sometimes twist to the truth to win the argument. Sometimes he would win debates just because he was louder and faster in talking.
Now, during that debate, Eck, and I believe, what episode was that? Was that episode 12?
We should have an episode list here because I have no idea.
But
during the debate, Eck successfully cornered Luther.
And he tied him to John Huss.
And the cornering is that Luther is not only someone trying to reform abuses of indulgences, but in fact, he thought the Pope and the councils could be wrong if they conflicted with Scripture. Luther spoke up for Scripture, and in doing so, he put himself in conflict with the Pope. So
when Luther refused to recant his teachings, he continued to write and publish documents that upset the papal leadership. In June of 1520, the Pope signed Exsurge Domine, which was the papal bull that formally outlined Martin Luther's errors, except, well, it didn't really clearly outline anything, but we'll get into that one later. So what is a bull?
So first of all, a bull is not an animal that has horns that you can ride at a cowboy bar. Okay?
Okay.
The bull is named from a Latin word bulla, which is the seal that is attached to the document to demonstrate its authenticity. It started, the bull is not just this document, but any document that was written by the Pope to be communicated throughout the Christian world would have this seal attached to it, a bulla. And now bulla gets abbreviated to bull, papal bull, because it's from the Pope.
And it's official.
That's really what a bull means here.
It's an official communication from the Pope.
And so it started as any document would that came from the Pope, but by the 1500s, the bull was the most formal document from the Pope.
So it was for anything serious, any serious occasion, from proclaiming someone to be a saint in a canonization.
Or proclaiming someone a heretic that should be excommunicated. This bulla, this seal attached to it, was important.
Now, in the 1500s, and even today, the Pope still does bulls, papal bulls, but they're primarily used, even in the 1500s, they were primarily used to elevate someone to the position of cardinal.
So now we've got this title, Exsurge Domine, and where does this name come from?
The name of all papal bulls comes from the first few Latin words of the document. So in this case, the bull was written against Luther, and the first words were, "Arise, O Lord."
So it goes, "Arise, O Lord, and judge your own cause. Remember your reproaches to those who are filled with foolishness all through the day. Listen to our prayers, for foxes have arisen, seeking to destroy the vineyard whose winepress you alone have trod."
And one of the great lines in here goes on to say, "The wild boar from the forest seeks to destroy your vineyard." So you can sort of get an idea that this wasn't going to canonize Luther.
This was not to elevate him to a cardinal, was it?
No.
It's a different kind of document. The preamble is written by Pope Leo X. First came a group of people called a papal consistory. The consistory gathered together. And, well, that word I just fumbled. Let's talk about what that means, Mike.
So a consistory, at least that's how I'm going to pronounce it. But a consistory is when you get a bunch, it means standing together. And it's basically saying that you have a bunch of cardinals who are going to stand together and with the Pope and make an official declaration. And so the consistory, you basically get a bunch of cardinals, and in this case, what they did was they got a bunch of cardinals together, and with theologians and lawyers and different people, and they all stood together and they wrote the papal bull.
They're kind of like a task force.
Yeah.
They're called together to stand together for specific topics. They'll meet together, they'll produce a document, it'll get maybe a preamble and a conclusion by the Pope, and then it's done.
Now, a consistory is relatively rare. They have the ones today, And they've always been sort of rare, but today I think the last extraordinary, I think they call it extraordinary consistory, it was about almost 20 years ago when they released prospects for the church for the third millennium. And so again, these primarily used for elevating cardinals, but sometimes there's something significant enough that requires a consistory and the papal bull and everything else that's associated with it. So why, I want to go back for a second. This whole thing with the wild boar.
Yeah, it is kind of strange. We kind of went over it maybe too quickly. Wild boars are hunted, and Pope Leo enjoyed hunting.
He loved hunting, as a matter of fact. I think, and we'll get into this in a later episode, but I think he died because he got sick while he was hunting.
Interestingly, that's also in the first season of Game of Thrones, how King Robert Baratheon dies.
Total sidebar discussion.
But just thinking about hunting boars, it's a dangerous activity. You got popes dying, you got kings on fictional shows dying.
But this, yes, he loved hunting. He had a lot of land. He had, you have to remember, if you can picture Italy, modern Italy, the Pope owned basically from the ankle up to the top of the thigh of Italy. That was the papal land. And so you have the papal boot, you have the boot of Italy, and the Pope owned all that land was owned by the Pope. And so he had plenty of land to go hunting. And
so this imagery of the papal man, this Leo X, hunting down this boar in the vineyard. And so he has taken upon himself this mantle of protection, that he is going to protect the Christian empire from this heretic Martin Luther by hunting him down. Now, interestingly, Lucas Cranach, in painting an altarpiece for the town church in Wittenberg, has Martin Luther in a pulpit, and then there is that's on the right side of the piece. Then in the center is Christ and the cross, and then on the left side is the people. And Martin Luther in the pulpit is pointing the people in his sermon to Jesus, while at the same time his other hand is pointing to the scriptures to say what you see in the scriptures is what you see at Christ on the cross. While Lucas Cranach in the pulpit painted vineyard and a boar, a wild boar running through the vineyard. So they had some fun with this.
So sort of playing with what the Pope had said and saying, yep, Martin Luther is the wild boar running through your vineyard, Mr. Pope, and that's going to be but happy to do it because he's pointing to Christ.
So if you're going to Wittenberg and you want to look at the Lucas Cranach altarpiece at the town church in Wittenberg, it's going to be small. It's going to be about the size of maybe a quarter, but you'll find that wild boar running through the vineyard.
Okay. So who was on this consistory?
So the consistory was about 40 cardinals working with papal lawyers and theologians. Because Exsurge Domine went through a consistory that was subsequently signed by the Pope, it is to be considered an infallible utterance from the Pope.
Okay. So because the consistory was made up of a portion of the College of Cardinals, right? That makes it really an official proclamation. Okay, I understand.
I'm still sorting my head around what that means, but it's got the weight of
the magisterium.
The magisterium, the teaching authority of the church, the princes of the church, which is what a cardinal is, along with the Pope.
And theologians and lawyers and everybody else gets together and they all stand together and they put this paper out and the Pope signs it, so it's infallible.
Which gets into conflict we're going to talk about with Vatican II and some of the statements that come up from that one.
Yeah.
But before we get there, there was actually two consistories that were formed. The first one quickly put together a list of Luther's errors. The Curia is just the household of bureaucrats in Rome, decided that Luther's teaching deserved a more thorough analysis.
So they reorganized the consistory.
To get more scholars on there?
And to sort of make sure that they wanted to do this right. At this point, they wanted to do it right. And they wanted to have you can almost see the thumbprint of Cardinal Cajetan here, where he wants to have a thorough, scholarly analysis of Luther's teachings and really look at it point by point.
So the second consistory is taking on the task of identifying Luther's teachings that should be considered heretical or erroneous. And they don't want to, in this second consistory, just completely write off Luther as everything he says and touches and tastes and smells, anything related to Luther is bad. They really want to be specific. What is wrong?
And so,
but that gets where John Eck then tumbles into things, and he says, you can't be so specific. It's just, he's bad.
Well, and this is good. So what ends up happening is when you read through this, and you read through Exsurge Domine, okay, the way it's structured is there's the preamble, which is the Arise, O Lord, and all that we already talked about. The Pope himself wrote that. And then you have this, a little bit of a discussion on things like, that Luther is aligning himself with the heretic John Huss or the Bohemians and the Greeks. So, basically that sort of alludes to the idea that Luther is rejecting the power of the Pope. So, and then they have...
And that's really the evidence of John Eck, because at the debate in Leipzig, that was where Eck found his victory, is getting Luther to attack the authority of the Pope.
Okay.
And that's why I think Eck comes into the consistory saying, stop looking at each specific error of Luther, because here's the big one that ultimately just matters. Luther is changing the magisterium of the church.
So there are
41 errors?
41 errors that are listed, and those errors are categorized as heretical, number 1, number 2, false, number 3, scandalous, and number 4, the least critical, or the least damaging, is offensive to pious ears. But, unfortunately, they did it in globo. And what that means is in globo, they say, here are the 4 categories, heretical, false, scandalous, offensive to pious ears. Here are the 41 errors.
But we don't know which one of the 41 errors are heretical versus false versus scandalous or offensive to pious ears. They're all bad.
It's just a hodgepodge. It's just 40. You can pick out any one, and it could be one of those 4. And so what ends up happening is you have this messy. It ends up being a messy assertion from the Pope.
Yeah. So one of the examples of a heresy is mentioning the heresies of the Greeks and Bohemians, which would seem...
That's probably the only clear point that it's called, where it calls Luther a heretic.
Yeah. And the heresy of the Greeks that's being attached to Luther here is the preeminence of the Pope is in dispute for Luther.
And it's also in
the Eastern Orthodox Church, the Pope is not preeminent.
Yeah.
And then the attach of the Bohemians is an allusion to John Huss, and John Huss lifting up the people as they read the scriptures, the true authority by God through whom interpretation of the scripture happens.
Okay.
So 41 errors.
So now these 41 errors, what are they accurate? Are the 41 errors actually teachings of Luther?
Well, for instance, error 32, a good work done very well is a venial sin. Luther did say a good work that is done is a sin if it's done in terms of securing your salvation. Any good work that you do for the purpose of securing your salvation is a sin.
So anytime you do a good work to benefit yourself rather than to benefit your neighbor, all of a sudden now that good work has become a sin.
So they take off any of that qualification about self-righteousness and just say, Luther has said good works are venial sins.
Okay, so it's a total mischaracterization of Luther's teachings.
Yeah.
And so you have that, there was the one, which we'll talk about down the road, the 33, I think, number 33.
Yeah, that heretics be burned is against the will of the Spirit. So Luther is advocating against burning people at the stake, and he's doing this from his view of the 2 kingdoms. And that Luther is proposing that the authority of the church is through the law and the gospel. The authority of the state is through the sword. It is not the work of the church to kill people.
And so, but the Pope through Exsurge Domine says, I have every right to kill people.
I have every right to burn people at the stake.
That's, so this is in Exsurge Domine, and these are sort of the things that you'll find as you read through that.
Or 17, the treasures of the church from which the Pope grants indulgences are not the merits of Christ and of the saints. So Luther argues that the merits of Christ are good, the merits of the saints are unnecessary. But the way 17 is written,
it says basically that there is... Can you read that again?
So the treasures of the church from which the Pope grants indulgences are not the merits of Christ and of the saints. And so this is identified as an error of Luther. And where this is seen as an error in the document is because it says that the merits of Christ and of the saints. Those two things are put together as synonymous. And Luther would say there is only the merit of Christ. There's not the merit of Christ and of the saints.
Well, and the way that's written, it's unclear because it also says, from which the Pope grants indulgences. So, yes, Luther had a problem with the Pope granting indulgences.
But the way that this is attached, it makes it sound like the merits of Christ are no effect.
That's right. And so you have all these mischaracterizations. Some of them are flat out lies. When as I was doing my study, some of these items Luther hadn't yet even discussed yet in any of his writings. It's not until after 1520 that he comes out strongly again. But basically, Eck was what we'll say it was Eck. I don't know. We assume it was Eck because nobody has gone through the trouble. Well, I don't know that it exists where you can say who input which one of these 41, but it's somebody on that council made up stuff that sort of said, okay, well, Luther is in this direction, and eventually he's going to get here, so we're going to just throw that in there too.
Well, and here's something that Luther is proposed to have said, that Christians must be taught to cherish excommunication rather than to fear them. I don't think...
He never said anything like that.
So, as we talk about Exsurge Domine, one of the things that can be struggling about it is just there's no sourcing either. Where did Luther say this? And where is the conversation with how this balances against Scripture? I would love to have read this with each thing that's identified as an error against Luther and have it balanced with, in contrast to Luther, here's what the Scriptures say. They don't do any of that.
They just come out and say, this is where we stand, period, done. You better recant because the church has spoken.
So we have time now for a beer break.
I think it's a good time for a beer break.
Yeah, because otherwise I'm just getting more frustrated about Exsurge Domine. So this is a different beer for us. Normally we'll try to feature Great Lakes beers. We've had some from Cleveland.
We had one from Cleveland. The rest have been from Michigan.
Yeah.
Now
this one's not from the Great Lakes.
No. This is we have a lot of listeners in Japan. I track where our shows are downloaded. I don't know where in Japan. I have no idea, but we have a lot of listeners in Japan. So I went to the store and I bought a Japanese craft brew, and just as a thank you for our listeners in Japan. This is from Kyuchi Brewery, which is just a little bit north of Tokyo. It's a little northwest of Tokyo. Kaiuchi, I hope I'm saying that right. It was established in 1823, and it was known, it's known in Japan primarily, or has historically been known, going back to 1823, for making sake. And then, I believe it was the 1996, they started brewing beer. And so, they have this, the brand that they've created for their beer is the Hitachino Nest beer.
It has an owl character logo, and over the years it's gained in Japan and worldwide attention by winning awards at numerous world beer competitions. In 2000, brew on-premise facilities opened to enjoy brewing original ale to the public. So Shochi Kuichi built a distillation distillation facility in March 2003 to aid with recycling and reduction of waste. And they started with the Sochi Kichi distilled liquor.
Okay, so they're making all sorts of stuff there. So this is it's and from their website.
In 2004, 2,000 liters of wine, and the Hitachino Nest is famous for its sophisticated, well-balanced beer brewed based on a substantial backbone of their family legacy. So the beer we have now is when we opened it, I thought of it maybe like a honey flavor to it.
Yeah, it's got an interesting. It's a Weizen beer. It's got more of a bite to it than most Weizen. It's more sweet than most Weizen beers are. But I like it. Like I said in the last episode, though, I like beer. So this is a good one.
Describing as a German-style Hefeweizen with banana, clove, and vanilla-like flavors with a touch of toasty wheat, malt, and
that's
it's not what I'm tasting.
No, I taste the banana. I taste the banana and the clove.
I wonder if the banana is what I'm thinking is the honey, that fruit.
That's, I didn't hit me until that's exactly what this is. This is banana and clove.
Banana and cloves. There we go. Now I'm all right.
Now you're getting on board. Well, maybe not. I don't think
I'm closer. I'm closer.
I'm actually liking this one.
It's not a session ale for me.
So I'm really enjoying it.
It's a specialty thing.
Now, when I sometimes for business find myself in Japan, and I'm really going to have to see if I can find my way to this brewery. I'm very interested in. They have something out there called the Nipponia beer, and the Nipponia beer is made from these. They went to the Department of Agricultural History in Japan. The brewery went to the Department of Agricultural History in Japan, and they got 16 seeds of this
barley strain from 180 years ago.
Yeah, and then they started to grow this stuff.
5 years it took a great effort to do it, and they succeeded in reviving a long-lost Japanese brewing staple of barley from 180 years ago. So this Nipponia is kind of like what was that movie with the dinosaurs lost in the...
A Jurassic Park?
It's a Jurassic Park beer.
So I really want to try this Nipponia. It's I actually went looking for it, and I couldn't find it. All I could find at the local...
So when you're...
I actually had to hunt. Usually here in Michigan, you can find a lot of craft beer at any grocery store and all that. But I wanted to find a Japanese craft beer.
So where did you find it?
It was at the Canopy.
Okay.
So but I went all over the place looking for this beer, and this was I didn't want Asahi. I didn't want Asahi Extra Dry. I didn't want any of those. Those would be easy to get, but I wanted something that was a little bit unusual, and I'm not disappointed. I'm really enjoying this one. So a drink to our Japanese listeners. Well, let's get back to it.
So the second consistory that had formed was going to issue a report that said only a few of Luther's teachings could possibly be considered heretical or erroneous. But the final bull is pretty threatening. Near the end, the bull states, therefore we can, without any further citation or delay, without further citation. What citation did they do anyways? All right. Without any further citation or delay, proceed against him to his condemnation and damnation as one whose faith is notoriously suspect and in fact a true heretic with the full severity of each and all of the above penalties and censures.
And then it goes on, it says, yet we have decided, now this is where, where they're sort of nice, they say, yeah, we have decided to use all the compassion we are capable of. It is our hope, so far as it lies in us, that he will experience a change of heart by taking the road of mildness we have proposed. Return and turn away from his errors. We will receive him kindly as the prodigal son returning to the embrace of the church. So basically...
I do like that. I mean, anytime the church would describe someone in error, I would hope that the ultimate goal is return.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. But it's sort of...
But we're not going to kill you, but it would be all right if we did. So really, we hope you change your mind. Otherwise, we're okay killing you.
Yeah, we can kill you if we want to, but we might not.
Because maybe you'll change your mind.
Yeah. So hopefully when a modern church reaches out to somebody who's gone off, they'll say, yes, we'll be like the prodigal son, and they won't threaten to kill them in the process. But that's so
rather than attaching specific errors as heretical or erroneous, instead they're going to be vaguely threatening, which makes it hard for Luther, because anything that he's being attacked is really a moving target.
Yeah. So here we are, the John Eck and Cardinal Cajetan were on this committee that were involved in drafting up the most important part of those 41 errors. Mm-hmm. And they really had to answer two questions. First, should Luther and his teachings be condemned? And then the second is, if they're going to be condemned, how should we go about doing it?
So the theologians, they want to completely demolish Luther, to renounce Luther. There's several people on the committee who said that there should be no papal bull at that time. They argued that Luther was too popular, and that this would just split the church.
Well, yeah, I wonder. My readings, it was unclear what they're, if they were saying. I wonder if they were saying, this might split the church. Because already had Miltitz.
Miltitz had gone through, and he described on his way up to see Luther, he couldn't find anyone on the side of the Pope, no matter how many pubs he stopped in.
He couldn't find the majority. Certainly, yes. Out of 5 people, he'd have 2 who supported the Pope, maybe.
Yeah.
So Miltitz was coming back. Miltitz said, things are, Luther has a lot of support up there in Germany. My thinking, and it'd be interesting. I obviously didn't go through the source documentation, and I wasn't able to find this clearly said, but I would assume that there was this component that we're saying, hey, this is really serious. Luther's too popular. We shouldn't do a papal bull right now. And Eck coming back, and Eck coming from Germany, saying, now is the time. We have to do the papal bull right now.
Because otherwise it'll be too late.
And where Eck where there was this component of the group who were seeking to sort of have a more slow progress, Eck pushed everything forward and ramrodded everything through. And he
now,
had
in between these guys is the canon lawyers.
Yeah.
So if Cajetan is like, let's have a scholarly dispute, and Eck is like, we need to burn him right now, the canon lawyers, they're in the middle, and they thought that Luther should be given a hearing and a chance to defend himself. The final version is a compromise between the canon lawyers and the theologians. Luther would be given no hearing.
So that let's just make one thing clear. That third group who said...
The canon lawyers?
No, the group who said, let's not put anything out there, let's not put out a papal bull, they're not even part of the negotiations now. They've been pushed out.
Yeah, they have been left out of the room, and now you got the let's kill him and let's have a hearing. Those are the two groups that are in the room.
So the middle ground is between those two groups.
And so finally they settle on 60 days. The final version was a compromise between the canon lawyers and the theologians. Luther would be given no hearing, but he would be given 60 days to recant his position. Now, the identity of the 60 days has been, is it 60 days from when Luther receives it or from when it's published? It's kind of seen from when Luther receives it.
Okay.
And he receives it in October, and he burns it on the 60th day in December, as like it means nothing.
Yeah, and I think it depends. Luther looked at it as the 60 days started when he received a copy. I think it
was different.
I think John Eck said the 60 days begins from the first day that it got nailed up to the church doors at one of the major churches.
Somewhere. Yeah.
So there was a little variation there. Luther says that the final day is, I think, December 10th, and Eck says the final day is like November 27th or something like that.
So the Pope assigns to John Eck and Girolamo Alessandro the task of publishing this bull. Alessandro goes first to the Netherlands, which is the seat of the Holy Roman Empire. That's where Charles V has his headquarters.
Oh, okay.
And Alessandro's going there because there's nervousness that if the growing Reformation spreads from Germany to the Netherlands, it's a little bit more of a global problem. So he goes first to the Netherlands, and Eck goes elsewhere. And as Eck goes places, interestingly, something I found out, Mike, is he had been given permission to the Pope to add names.
By the Pope.
Yeah, he had been given permission by the Pope, but somewhat secretly, to add names. So if along the way he heard someone kind of sympathetic, he could label them as a heretic along with Luther.
Okay.
And so Eck and Alejandro write about times when the opposition was so fierce to them that their very lives are endangered. When he was in Leipzig, Eck had to retreat for an hour to a cloister until the mob left because they were so mad at Eck for publishing the papal bull in Leipzig.
You know, what's interesting about that is with Leipzig, like we talked about with
that was Duke George of Saxony, who was pro-pope.
Yeah, Duke George was pro-pope. And then you also had all the concerns about the Hussites, the Bohemians. It was almost as if the papal bull was specifically written to appeal to these people. And
it should have been their wheelhouse. And even them, they're against publishing it in their lands.
You know, and it's just...
That's one of the reasons, we were talking about publishing in June and Luther doesn't get it till October. Yeah. This is why it took so long. It's because Eck and Alejandro are traveling through Germany and the Netherlands, and they're trying to publish it in a place, make sure it's supported in that place, and then move to the next place. And it's making them, they're not going to Wittenberg first. They're going and trying to gain their support around Germany and then finishing and arriving in Wittenberg and handing it to them there.
So one of the things that I read, and I actually didn't capture it in the notes here, was that the Pope, between Eck and Alejandro and all the other forces of the Pope, everybody from the papal side is trying to push for the burning of Luther's documents as they're going through. They want gather up all of Luther's works and burn them all. And they're finding huge resistance every city they go to.
Well, what a thing of the press and the power of the printed word that, first of all, there would be in all these cities, the writings of Luther.
Yeah.
Just think about what that says about the popularity of Luther, that every city they arrive in, there is this big pile.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like I've written a lot of newsletter articles. I've written some blog articles, but I'm pretty sure you go outside of Hamburg, there's not too many cities where you can find my writings.
Maybe in Brighton.
Bake the big stretch. But Luther his writings are everywhere. If anything should tell you how popular Luther is, Eck is supposed to burn Luther's writings, and there are these huge piles.
Well, but the problem is they can't get these piles built. Now, Eck is finding, he comes into the town, he says, okay, gather everything together, let's burn all Luther's writings, and there's a little tiny
because
pile.
They don't want to bring them out.
Yeah, they don't want to bring them out. And so there's this little tiny pile of a couple of pamphlets and stuff.
But it's not because there's no documents in those cities, it's because they don't want to bring them.
Yeah, that's right. And what ended up happening was people would bring out papal, the canon law. They'd bring out Roman stuff and say, okay, yeah, this is from Luther, and they'd burn that. And so there was all this stuff going on where Eck was just finding resistance.
So competing fires, the canon law, or Luther's.
Well, they would actually in the fire that was supposed to be for Luther, they would throw the canon law in there.
Oh, so you could look in there and go, "Hey, wait a minute, that's not what Luther wrote. That's what I wrote. That's not supposed to be in there."
What would happen? And so it was, they were sort of, it was extremely difficult for Eck to complete his assignment of getting Luther, getting all of his books pulled together, getting them burned, and getting him tagged as a heretic. It was very, very difficult in his travels through Germany.
So on December 10th in 1520, 60 days after Luther had received a copy of this bull, he and Philip Melanchthon invited the local university faculty and students to assemble at the Elster Gate in Wittenberg.
Okay.
And they had a bonfire. And they did not put Luther's writings in that bonfire.
No. Now that particular bonfire originally was supposed to be just the canon law, which was the critical document. This is symbolic of
the authority of the Pope to burn him as a heretic.
Yes. So they're saying we are going to burn everything that declares papal power.
So they burn the papal power, but they also burn papal constitutions, and then the key one is the works of scholastic theologians.
Okay.
And then finally, Luther took his copy of the bull and put it in the flames.
Now, one thing that we skipped over, and I want to go back to this, just before that bonfire, just outside of Wittenberg, on December the 10th, where the canon law was burned and the papal bull was burned, in November, Luther wrote a defense where he went through the papal bull.
Yeah, during the 60 days from receiving the papal bull to burning, it's not like he ignored it.
Yeah. So he went through and he goes through and enumerates each point and where he stands on it. So
that document's called Assertions of All the Articles Wrongly Condemned in the Roman Bull.
Now, this is not exactly a conciliatory. This isn't what's the term, like where we're going to try and get together. We're going to try and.
It's not a reconciling document.
No, this is not a reconciling document. Thank you. So he says, I'm going to just read a couple of things here that Luther wrote. He said, therefore I have said and still say that the Pope's indulgences are nothing but lies and deceit.
So he's not turning around on that one?
No.
Okay.
And then another point he says, I was wrong. I admit it.
He's going to admit something?
Yeah.
Let's find out what he admits.
He goes, I admit it. When I said that indulgences were the pious defrauding of the faithful, I recant and say indulgences are the most pious frauds and impostors of the most rascally pontiffs, by which they deceive the souls and destroy the goods of the faithful. So not exactly, working to bridge the gap between Rome and Luther.
So, Catholic view of all of this is most Catholic scholars consider Exsurge Domine to be a strange document. Quote, strange.
Yeah.
Catholic scholar John M. Todd calls it contradictory, lacking in clarity, and incidentally far less effective than it might have been. So,
it was actually Todd's scholarship that points out that Cardinal Cajetan was disgusted with Eck's bulldozing of the final and miserably, quote, air quotes here, miserably incompetent version through the committee. Even John Eck later said that the bull was hopelessly inadequate.
Independent of Lutherans, Catholic theological discussion on Exsurge Domine continues because Article 3 advocated for
Article 33.
Article 33 in the bull advocates for the burning of heretics at the stake. They said that Luther was in error when he said the church does not have the authority to burn heretics.
So that's a little bit problematic for the modern church because this is supposed to be an infallible document. And what the problem is that...
So we're going to talk a little bit about infallibility then right now.
Yeah. And this is getting into the... I went to the Vatican website. And
so we're not making this up. This is the Vatican website.
This is the Vatican website. And I'm trying to understand the role, how they look at infallibility. Because one of the things...
I think Protestants often get it wrong.
Yeah.
Protestants make it sound like, well, if the Pope says the sky is gray and it's a blue sky outside, then we have to believe the Pope. No, that's not what this is about.
No. Papal infallibility...
That was a bad example, by the way. I mean, the sky is often gray.
We'll let it go. You've had too much Japanese beer. So the basically papal infallibility is only, first of all, it's only has to do with issues of faith and morals, and then I'm going to just read from the Vatican website. Let's see here. Where was that? So the Roman Pontiff, head of the College of Bishops, enjoys this infallibility in virtue of his office when, as supreme pastor and teacher of all the faithful, who confirms his brethren in the faith, he proclaims by a definitive act, and this is important. This is where he's speaking infallibly. Okay, he proclaims by a definitive act a doctrine pertaining to faith or morals. So it's contained to faith and morals. Okay, number one. The infallibility promised to the church is also present in the body of the bishops. So the bishops have to be involved. Together with Peter's successor, they exercise the supreme magisterium above all in an ecumenical council.
And the word magisterium means teacher. And magister is a teacher in Latin. Magisterium is the teaching authority of the church.
And so in the Roman Catholic Church, when they say magisterium, they're talking about the cardinals, I think the bishops and cardinals, but it's at least the cardinals.
And it's the teaching authority of the church to say, this is what faith and morals mean?
Okay, so it's when the Pope and the at least my understanding, reading through this, is when the Pope and the cardinals, or the magisterium, together talk about something with faith and morals, and then then they are in the realm of when they make a definitive act of doctrine. So those are the three things. It's a definitive act of doctrine with the Pope and the magisterium all coming together on the subject of faith and morals. That's my understanding of this.
The idea of the infallibility of the Pope doesn't get confirmed as doctrine, I think, by the Council of the Church, so Vatican I in the 19th century.
That's true. That's true.
And so even during Luther's time, they didn't talk about the Pope as a confirmed infallible thing, right?
That's true. So I think it was in the 1870s, Vatican I is when basically the Pope, the history of that one, and I'm not a papal.
We're moving past our notes, folks.
We're moving past our notes, but this is from my memory. Basically what happened was the Pope was under attack, and the sort of the church rallied around him. And in this process of rallying around the Pope, they decided that, we're going to make you infallible. And it's going to be with these certain rules. And so But
they were talking about the office of the Pope as the supreme teacher and pastor of the church.
Well, the Pope actually acted infallible, going back to Luther's time and prior to that. I'm going to say in prior to the Great Schism with the Eastern Church, Pope Leo, I forget the number.
Well, when we talk about the treatise on the power and primacy of the Pope, or maybe we can bring this up. Why are we talking about this struggle with infallibility in relationship to this document, Exsurge Domine, and Article 33 saying that it's okay for the Pope to burn heretics? Is because Vatican II states, quote, the human person has a right to religious freedom. Vatican II then goes on to say, this freedom means that all men are to be immune from coercion on the part of individuals or of social groups and of any human power in such ways that no one is to be forced to act in a manner contrary to his own beliefs, whether privately or publicly, whether alone or in association with others, within due limits.
So obviously there is Exsurge Domine saying, okay, it's okay to burn people at the stake. And Vatican II saying
everyone has liberty and freedom to think what they think.
Yeah, those two are on a collision course, and they're both infallible documents. Now, the thing is, and we want to be respectful to the Catholic theologians here, and I don't want to. So this is a discussion amongst Catholic scholars, and I think what their Catholic theology has worked through these kinds of issues in the past, and what they do is they come up with very fine distinctions, where Lutheran theology tends to be more clear. What the Catholic theology will do is they'll come up with very fine distinctions to say that, Exsurge Domine, because it did everything in globo, right? We can say that this particular line number 33, was not part of heresy. It was a problem for scandalous ears. Okay. All right. So now we'll categorize it as that. So it's a lower level, and it's not, what is preeminent is what was said at Vatican II. So there's, they can work through that, but they have to sort of define, what does it mean when we say infallible?
So it is December of 1520, and Luther has received Exsurge Domine. He's had his 60 days, and he has burned the papal bull. Quoting Catholic scholar John Todd, in what this papal bull means, he goes on to say there was an indifference to truth, whether factual or theological, in Exsurge Domine.
So we'll be taking a look at Luther's open letter to the Christian nobility, which was written concurrently to Exsurge Domine during our next episode. And the open letter to the Christian nobility, where the Exsurge Domine is the Pope taking a swipe at Luther. The open letter to Christian nobility is Luther taking a swipe at the Pope. So I think that does it. Let's
sign off by saying thank you to Josh Yeagley. Thank you to St. Paul Lutheran Church. A recognition of our source materials is helpful today as well, because there wasn't a lot in Luther's works with Exsurge Domine. There's more in Wikipedia, I suppose. And also John Todd, who wrote Martin Luther, a biographical study, which is an interesting book because it's written by a Catholic scholar.
Yeah, Hans Hildebrand, he had several documents we referenced for this one. He is I believe, a Presbyterian scholar.
Okay. And then papalencyclicals.net, Catholic.com.
Now, Catholic.com is an interesting one. That's a Catholic website set up to defend Catholic faith against Protestants like us, And but it was a great place for me. I went through and I looked at that, and I wanted to make sure that I wasn't mischaracterizing any Catholic teachings. So that was very helpful to get the at least these, we'll call it Catholic apologists, who were very clear about where they stood. So that was good. And
you can look to Vatican for a copy of Exsurge Domine. We will also have links to it on our website attached to this episode. You can contact us at graceontap.podcast@gmail.com.
Or Grace on Tap. You can check us out at our website, graceontap-podcast.com.
Or catch us on Facebook at facebook.com/graceontap.podcast. We'd appreciate any reviews you can post on iTunes. It helps to get the word out and raise the search capability of Grace on Tap as a podcast people will want to listen to. Cheers.